Guys, welcome to Falcons Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman. I'm joined by my co-host, Scott Karasik. This week we are joined by our good friend, Charles McDonald of the Falcoholic, of Bleacher Report, of the Setting the Edge podcast. Am I missing anything, Charles? Are you adding anything to your repertoire?
No, that's it. That's it right now.
Okay. All right. Well, next week he'll change his Twitter handle like he does every year. And he'll jump on a new podcast or something. So this week we're talking about the Falcons' Week 16 win over the Panthers. We'll talk about their upcoming Week 17 matchup against the Saints. We'll touch upon the thing that Charles tweeted a little earlier today about race and quarterbacks briefly, and we'll answer your guys' mailbag questions. But as we always start the show off, we talk a little bit about these sort of minor roster moves that the Falcons make during the days when we're not doing this podcast. And this past week, they cut a couple of guys, one of which I thought was a little bit of a surprise. I'll be curious to see if my co-host and the guest agree. That player was Robinson Therese. The team wound up cutting Malachi Goodman. Not a big surprise just because he was signed initially just to replace Adrian Claiborne. Adrian Claiborne played last week, so they didn't really need Malachi Goodman. They brought DJ Tialavea, my favorite tight end, up from the practice squad. Josh Keys, a linebacker from Boston College. And to replace those two guys on the practice squad, they signed Martin Affetti, brother of Jermaine, and tight end Darian Griswold. I'm curious, Scott, what did you think of these roster moves?
I think Therese is the only real surprise. Tialavea made a ton of sense because they were a tight end short. They needed a guy to come in for their 3 tight end sets this past weekend. Keys, I thought, instead of Therese, was a bit interesting just because, yeah, you were down a linebacker in Campbell, but Keys wound up – I don't think Keys wound up even playing.
I think he did get some work on special teams.
Okay, so I mean, he may have played special teams, but I think he was only brought up because Therese was getting cut due to Therese being, injured and probably a step slow, and he never really picked up the instinctual side of things that you were expecting to see some sort of something out of him. I don't think we got really much out of Therese that anybody else could have gotten. And then Affetti and Griswold, they're late season practice squad guys. I don't really think they're worth a damn, either one of them, honestly. I think they're just warm bodies that'll make a camp roster and then get cut.
Charles, wasn't Griswold at the Senior Bowl?
Nah, I have no idea. I don't know who that is.
Okay. I thought he was at the Senior Bowl this past year, so I thought maybe you had a chance to see him while you were there.
He played for Arkansas State. He's basically a converted tackle.
Yeah, I don't know. I know nothing about him. But the Therese cut did kind of shock me just because I thought he had some moments last year where he played well. I thought maybe he'd be in the plans for next year, like as a third safety, but I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It's not a big deal because, Ricardo Allen's been playing pretty well recently, even though he's the worst free safety in the history of the Atlanta Falcons. And Keanu Neal's had a great rookie year, so it's not like he wasn't an expendable piece for the Falcons. So it kind of sucks to go see him play for the Saints just because the Saints are the worst thing ever. But, at the end of the day, it's not moving the needle.
Fair enough.
Ricardo Allen's not great, but he's still better than like the Corey Halls and the Keon Carpenters of the world.
I would hope so.
Not like that's saying much though, because those guys were the worst safeties in the league when they were playing.
Okay, here's the question, Scott. Though, who's better, Ricardo Allen or Thomas Deku?
I think that's a push.
Oh, I'm taking Ricardo every time.
I think that's a push. Ricardo Allen's better against the run, takes better angles, but I think Deku had more in coverage. I think Deku was more instinctual in coverage and made more plays on the ball. They were both.
Well,
they're both average. It's just Deku was average when there was nobody good in the NFC.
Okay. People probably know where I still sort of stand on that issue. I wasn't a big Deku hater like most of the world, but I think Ricardo Allen's better. But let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about a subject that is near and dear to Charles's heart. It is also near and dear to my heart as well, but I don't tweet about it as much as Charles does. I know, Charles, you talked about this quite a bit. You were on the I Hate Sully Football podcast this past week, talking with those guys about this. So, if people want to hear a little bit more in depth, then they can go check out that show. But just touch upon sort of what your sort of opinions are with sort of the rhetoric that surrounds this draft class that seems to be very different from the rhetoric that we saw last year. And it seems like maybe it's a coincidence if in some people's eyes, or maybe it's not necessarily a coincidence that this year's draft class of quarterbacks seems to be headlined by black quarterbacks like Deshaun Watson and Deshaun Kaiser, and last year's draft class was headlined by white quarterbacks like Jared Goff and Carson Wentz.
Yeah. Well, if you've been paying attention to just the early draft coverage, because it's only December, so we haven't really, like ESPN and NFL Network, they haven't really shifted gears to that yet. But all you hear about is just, how this is the worst. The worst quarterback draft in the last 20 years. It's the worst quarterback draft since 2013, which was also headlined by two black players, E.J. Manuel and Geno Smith, who at the end of the day aren't really worth a damn, but I mean, you still just kind of see where it's coming from. And I just don't see how you can watch, Jared Goff in college and Deshaun Watson in college and just not clearly come away with Deshaun Watson being a vastly superior prospect. If you needed one game to sell you on Deshaun Watson as a future, top 12 quarterback in the NFL, all you got to do is just show anybody that Alabama game. Be like, oh my God, wow, this guy is really talented. This year he kind of came back and, if you look at the stats from this past year to last season, it wasn't really that much different, but I think after that Alabama game, you kind of expected that to be who Watson was every single week, and that's really just not realistic. So, he had some interception problems. I think some of that was scheme related. He had a few interceptions where it's just, I'm catching the ball one step, I'm going to hit this slant, and there's no really check for me out of that on that play. And if you run it enough times, the defense is going to see it and they're going to squat on that and pick it off. But if I've been watching the last half of his season, and he really came on after they lost to Pittsburgh. He was absolutely phenomenal. And it's funny when you see I was listening to Todd McShay's first draft podcast. I think it was 2 weeks ago, and he was talking about how Deshaun Watson had maturity issues, and it's just oh God, you just see the same narratives over and over and over again. So Watson, the kid who graduated in less than 3 years from Clemson, which is a good school, while being the captain of his football team and setting a lot of records, has maturity issues. Sure,
but let's put it this way: Clemson denied my application, and I had a 3.8 in high school. So it's not like it's a easy school to get into. Right.
And you see, I mean, even back in when Russell Wilson was coming out of the draft, you see is he committed? Is he going to go play baseball? Does he really want to be a quarterback, or is he going to go play baseball when he's a 50th round draft pick in the MLB? Or when you go back to Cam Newton, does he have the maturity? Does he have the temper to be the face of a franchise? But you don't ever hear these questions about white quarterback prospects. So, I mean, they're already selling this to you as the worst quarterback class in 3 years, 20 years, but they aren't actually giving you any reasons why. Todd McShay can go and say, I can point you to this clip, this clip, this clip, this clip. This is why Deshaun Watson's a bad quarterback. I can point you to here. This is why Deshaun Kaiser's a bad quarterback. It's, you just hear the same narratives that you always hear about black people. Oh, he's lazy. He's He's got maturity issues. We don't know if he's committed, blah, 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 blah. And at the end of the day, you're just doing a huge disservice to people who don't actually, follow college football like that, and you're their main source of information on the matter, and you're just kind of giving them like bullshit info, tired, lazy racial narratives, and it doesn't really help anybody.
See, while I do agree it's not a great quarterback class, it's not because of the top. It's because of after those first 5, I don't think there's a single quarterback that's really worth a shit. And the first 5 to me are Watson, Kaiser, Mahomes, Kaya, and Trubisky. Now, I know you're not a huge fan of Trubisky, but I see a lot of Andy Dalton in him, which to me, if you're going to be a top 20 quarterback in the NFL, you're going to be a purgatory level or better quarterback, you're worth a first-round pick. Kaya, to me, is like a late first-rounder. Mahomes, I have a mid-first-round grade. Kaiser and Watson, I have top 10 grades on. And Watson, I think, is probably the best quarterback since Winston to come out.
Yeah, and it's funny. Like I just think, I hate to see you guys struggle, but I do get like a weird sense of satisfaction when you see Jared Goff get compared to like Aaron Rodgers and shit before the draft, just because they both went to Cal, and he's like one of the worst quarterbacks I've seen this year, fairly easily.
Well, remember, who was the guy that they compared Jared Goff to most last year? It was Matt Ryan, right?
It was Matt Ryan, yeah.
Yeah, and Matt Ryan came in and within 2 weeks of competing with Chris Redmond, basically stole that job pretty handily. They knew right away that he was going to be their franchise guy that first mini camp, and then Jared Goff doesn't get the job because he's not ready until week 12, week 10, whatever it was.
Week 10, yeah.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, like, I'm with you. Like, I haven't really studied this quarterback class. Like, I've seen Trubisky play. Didn't blow me away by any means. He's certainly a competent quarterback or anything like that. Watson's probably really the only guy that I really saw extensively just because of, being a Pitt fan and seeing him in the ACC. I think Watson, just like all these quarterbacks, they all have their flaws. Right. They all have their things that you can nitpick. Like, Watson, I think you nailed it, Charles, when you said, like, he had some interception issues. He had those last year, and it was one of those things that I was like, okay, since he's going to be the de facto number 1 quarterback going into this year, these are the type of things that get nitpicked to death, as we see every year with whoever's the top quarterback prospect. But I think at the end of the day, like, I personally wasn't a huge fan of Goff at Cal. I thought Carson Wentz, I thought he was a good, better player, better prospect. So I actually like Carson Wentz, unlike most of draft Twitter. But it was one of those things where, like,
I like him too.
To me, the idea that Goff and Wentz were these guys that were worthy of sort of trading the entire, the next 3 years of your drafts for, and looking at guys like Watson and Kaiser and whoever else and saying, oh, yeah, they're not good or anything, like that doesn't make any sense to me. And I think you're right. You always sort of hear these sort of intangible issues that the black quarterbacks tend to always have. It's whether it's Jameis Winston or Cam Newton, or they couldn't knock Teddy Bridgewater on his intangibles, so they knocked him on his knees.
Maybe they were right about that.
But it's one of those things where, like, you always see these issues, and like some of them are valid, some of them, I wasn't the biggest fan of Geno Smith when he came out because I did think he had some major flaws in his game, but it wasn't because he was a poor leader or he was immature. It was just I didn't think the skill on the field. And then, you contrast that with sort of Johnny Manziel and whatnot. And, I know he wasn't the most beloved prospect by all people, but people were like in love with sort of that, basically him being a huge asshole in college. And people were saying how that's a strength of his game. And then, when you have these guys like Watson who really are pretty
low-key
flawless in terms of, yeah, I mean, it's just like, and then these guys are getting killed for it. You just sort of see these undertones that I think have been existed for a very long time, and it always seems to be surrounding whether black quarterbacks have like the, the mental makeup, the maturity, the leadership, all this potential in today's NFL, which I think is sort of just kind of ridiculous at this point in time. Like, it doesn't mean that just because your skin color makes you a better quarterback than this other guy or whatnot, but it is one of those things where you just sort of always see this when it comes to any sort of high-profile black quarterback. I think you can look at the situation with Tyrod Taylor in Buffalo and see sort of similar things working there, where like you look at Tyrod Taylor, he's going to get pushed out of Buffalo after 2 years when he's been by far the best quarterback that's played for them since Doug Flutie 15 years ago. And Trent Edwards got like 3 years. Brian Fitzpatrick got like 4 years with Buffalo, and they're going to push Tyrod Taylor out for 2 years. Like, everybody knows Tyrod Taylor isn't the world's most perfect quarterback, but it's one of those things like where it's like, it seems like to me, and controversial or not, but it just seems like to me that if you're a black quarterback, if you don't basically pull a Cam Newton and take a team to a Super Bowl within a finite amount of time, you're going to get run out of this league, and you're not going to get opportunities that other quarterbacks are going to get. Lesser quarterbacks are going to get.
Did you see that?
I completely agree, because as Emory Hunt has been saying for years, there's all these tall white quarterbacks that stay backups for years and somehow stay in the league forever. The Matt Schaubs of the world, the Ryan Fitzpatricks of the world.
Blaine
Gabbert that still somehow get these roles. Why can't guys like Geno Smith, even if he's not this great quarterback, which he's not, let someone have a why not at least let someone put him as a backup? You know, why not have someone have him as the backup to Matt Ryan next year? I wouldn't mind having Geno Smith as a backup to Matt Ryan. Again, I know he's not a great quarterback, but he's better than a lot of quarterbacks, especially Matt Schaub.
Yeah, and it's funny. Like the other week, you saw Adam Schefter reporting that teams were willing to spend $14 million on Mike Glennon. Dude, Mike Glennon hasn't played since Jameis Winston got to, or he played this year in the second half after the Falcons were blowing out the Bucs. So he has 11 pass attempts since Jameis Winston got drafted. What do you need to spend like $12 to $14 million on Mike Glennon for? And when he played, he had less than 60% completion percentage. What's the big deal with Mike Glennon? And they're about to run Tyrod Taylor out of Buffalo with a defense that just gave up like 34 points to Matt Moore and Jay Ajayi. Like, come on.
Mike Glennon is tall and white.
Yeah.
So he's given an extra shot.
It's just, I think the Bill situation.
I mean, I hate to say it that way, but again, this is why I think you both hanging out with Emory and Mobile, because he was just sitting there going off on a rant. I was like, dude, I get it. I agree. Like, a lot of these quarterbacks deserve second chances that don't get them. But he's tall and white, so he gets that shot.
From my perspective, like, I get why teams want Blaine Gabberts and Charlie Whitehursts and Kellen Clemens. They want backups that have experience. But you look at around the league, like, let's go ahead. Geno Smith, failed starter. Robert Griffin III, failed starter. All right, but you want to bet how often these guys are going to get backup opportunities? EJ Manuel, failed starter. Like, how many teams are like Charlie Whitehurst basically goes on vacation for 3 months out of the year, and he has an NFL job waiting for him, and that's been the case for like 7 straight years. Like, and Charlie Whitehurst is terrible. Like, he is a terrible quarterback. Blaine Gabbert is a terrible quarterback, but because they have experience, they get jobs. And why not guys like Geno Smith and RG3 and throw Tyrod Taylor in that group when he doesn't deserve to be? But even if you did, like, these guys are going to struggle to get jobs in the NFL. Look at Thad Lewis. Thad Lewis, had a nice 3-game stretch with the Bills a couple of years ago, and keep a job for more than like 6 weeks ever since then. And it's like, why do certain players get these opportunities that other players don't get? And there's always seems he's too short, his knees are too skinny, he's not a good enough leader. It's all these issues. There's always an excuse for why these players don't get opportunities. And to me, at this point in time, I'm sort of fed up with it. I think you're going to see quite a bit of it in the draft. It's ridiculous to me that Deshaun Watson is not a lock to be a top 5 pick. Like, okay, if you don't think he's the best quarterback in this draft, that's fine. That's up to you. But he should, without a doubt, be a top 5 pick.
Yeah, it's dumb, and this is why I'm rooting so hard for Hugh Jackson, like, to just make that thing work in Cleveland, because I mean, he brought in RG3, so he's not afraid to spend a top pick on Deshaun Watson. So I'm kind of hoping the Cleveland Browns can pull out some way to get Myles Garrett and Deshaun Watson in the draft and just get that thing back on track.
It's going to be hilarious when he takes Myles Garrett, number 1, and Deshaun Watson at like number 10, and Watson ends up going to a Pro Bowl his first or second season.
Yeah.
Look,
the thing is, this shit all starts in college. You got assholes like Mark Richt and Nick Saban and all these guys, he counts, that take black quarterbacks from high school and say, you know what? He's athletic. I'm going to put him at corner. Oh, he's athletic. I'm going to put him at wide receiver.
I don't think Saban's fair. I don't think that's a fair criticism of Saban because he has Blake Sims and he's starting Jalen Hurts this year.
He's starting Jalen Hurts, but before he started Hurts, it took having some tall white guy completely fuck up for him to even start Jalen Hurts. That's the only reason why Jalen Hurts started, is because Blake Barnett was a complete trash bag the first game. If Barnett doesn't suck that first game and throws for 5 touchdowns, Jalen Hurts still sits on the bench. He didn't start Blake Sims until after A.J. McCarron had already left. So, again, it does count with him. I think it counts completely with him. He may be changing now with Jalen Hurts, but for the longest time, he didn't have a lot of black quarterbacks. And it's probably a big reason why he hasn't had a lot of good quarterbacks. But it does start at the college level. When guys like Mark Richt are saying, oh, hey, Nick Marshall, come play corner for me, and then he goes to Auburn and leads them to a national championship, that says a lot to me. And yeah, Nick Marshall's not a great quarterback. He was never a good NFL prospect. But in the college level, he deserved a shot. And there's a lot more guys like that.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this all night. Folks, I'm sure Charles shared similar thoughts and more thoughts on the I Hate Sully Football podcast. So go check that out. And let's talk about something a little less controversial. Let's talk about the Falcons' 33-16 win over the Panthers last week. They were able to clinch a playoff spot with that win. It was nice to see the Falcons come out and take care of business. Probably wasn't the most dominant performance from the Falcons, despite what the scoreboard said, but certainly it was a performance where they seemed to handle that game. It never really, other than maybe a stretch in the third quarter, late in the third quarter, it never really seemed like that game got out of control for the Falcons. I'm curious, sort of, Charles, where your thoughts were watching that game live.
I was pumped because I think in past years, we've gotten so used to, the Falcons falconing games like this, like against like the Rams and the 49ers and the Panthers. And it was just it's really been nice to see them just handle business against a team that they're way better than. And you don't really see this team maybe like that Eagles game. But besides that, you don't really see like this team get pumped up about themselves and start feeling themselves too much that they aren't going to come out and just handle business and do what needs to be done. And it was nice that
the Eagles game, they were just tired.
Maybe. But it was nice to see, the secondary play really well. I thought Jalen Collins had a nice game considering that he had a really high volume of targets. I think Pro Football Focus charted him with 15 targets on the day. So for him not to really get torched besides that one touchdown, where you could argue that there was offensive pass interference. I personally was fine with the no call. But, I think it's been nice to see him improve. I thought Poole had a nice day. I thought Ricardo Allen has continued his stretch of strong play for the past month or so. And, it was just a good win.
I'm with you on that. I think overall it was a really strong performance. One of the things I expected early in the season was sort of our offensive coming out of the gate. I expected a couple of games where they would sort of slide to the norm, like a little bit more ups and downs, and they've had a couple of games where they seem to struggle. And you could probably make the argument that this Panthers game, that stretch during the second and third quarters where they just were not scoring and weren't really converting in the red zone, was probably one of the more struggles that is one of the biggest struggles we've seen this offense have this season, at least as of lately. But it's one of those things that is really refreshing to sort of see the strength of this team consistently show up week in and week out, and you can rely on this offense to sort of do what it's supposed to do. Like, certain teams have given them some trouble, like the Eagles in Kansas City. But for the most part, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you can trust this team. I still have my issues with the defense. I do think they've performed better in recent games. I don't necessarily know if that means they're coming together as proclaim it as, but I think the secondary played well. I think the run defense was okay, but it didn't have to be great because the offense took care of business and Carolina stopped running the ball at a certain point in the game, and we never really got to see Jonathan Stewart have to be a factor in this week, and I think that was something that played into their strengths. Pass rush didn't quite live up to what I thought they would do against a weak Panthers offensive line, but I can't complain about it. I think they did get pressure on Cam Newton to a certain extent, so it wasn't like the pass rush was poor. It just, the worst thing I can say about this defense is I thought they would dominate this game. They didn't dominate the game. They just played well. That's the biggest criticism I can say about this team from this week.
It also helped for Cam Newton to have, I think, one of the worst games he's ever played in the NFL, too. He was way off on that game.
I think they were game planning for him well, though. I think that's part of why he was off. Early in the game, they threw him off with good pressure, and he only had like 2 good drives.
Yeah, but I mean, he still had a lot of erratic throws, like especially in the red zone when they got close, and Kelvin Benjamin dropped some passes, but I was still pretty pleased with the secondary's performance.
Yeah, I'm very happy myself with it.
Yeah, look. If we're being honest, it wasn't as if they were going up against a who's who of great receivers. I know you joke, Charles.
Yeah, exactly.
They were throwing it to Joe Webb. Chris Manhertz was getting work. Like Carolina's receivers are trash. It's like Greg Olsen, and that's about it. But it's one of those things like they really kept Greg Olsen in check. Other than that one 17-yard catch he had, he was pretty much shut down. He caught a bunch of short throws and underneath stuff, and it wasn't a factor. And then, Ted Ginn isn't a world beater. Philly Brown isn't a world beater, but Greg Olsen is. And the fact that this secondary with Keanu Neal and company were able to basically contain him to the degree that they were is certainly something that is worthy of celebrating. So I think the defense does deserve a lot of credit for doing what they were supposed to do. Some of these games you don't need the defense to play outstanding. They just need to be good enough. And I think particularly as of late, that's been more often the case. They've been good enough.
Let's just say I'm glad that Atlanta is not the team to play where if your offense is struggling, you play Atlanta and your offense finally isn't struggling anymore. They did their job versus the Cardinals, versus the Rams, versus the Niners, versus the Panthers. Teams that all have struggling offenses right now, and they held them all to under 20 points, and most of them to under 16. So I'm happy right now.
Yeah, I mean, there was a stretch of the season where you look at the Philly game, you look at the Kansas City game. Those were even the Rams to a certain extent with the ability for them to run the balls effectively. Like, it was a stretch of the season where it did seem like the defense, you were going to get out of one of your slumps. The Chiefs weren't very explosive. They were very explosive against the Falcons, et cetera. That really hasn't been the case. So, if the defense is improving, I don't know if they're coming together, but they're getting better, and that's all you can really hope for at this point here.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's made me kind of excited over the past month or so, I guess. Like, I know they've been playing shit awful offenses. Like the Rams and the 49ers are really bad. But I think you can see that like the defense it has pieces in place to be good in the very near future. I think the secondary is set. I think Deion's been great. I'm personally not crazy about Devondre Campbell like some people are, but if you go into 2017 with Deion at Mike and Devondre at Will, that's fine. But I think you just need some more dudes on the defensive line. And luckily, this draft and free agency is just loaded with defensive line talent just across the board. So hopefully hopefully that Alfred extension kind of set the tone for the offseason where we're just going to go get some nasty dudes on the defensive line and go try to win a Super Bowl. But I think like your back seven for 2017 is above average, but the defensive line just needs to be retooled completely.
I think you need a weak side linebacker. I think Campbell's long-term fit is on the strong side. And I'd love to see the Falcons take a guy like Zach Cunningham. And even in the first round, yes, Zach Cunningham in the first round. I know it probably wouldn't be a popular pick with everybody, but I think it would make a lot of sense. And I think it helped the defense out tremendously if you added him in. If you got Zach Cunningham and then you signed a guy like Calais Campbell or JPP, just someone who's that guy who can play that strong side role and that defensive tackle in the nickel. And I think that would change the defense tremendously.
Yeah, I just wonder if I know people talk about moving Campbell to Sam, but I think when you look at like where Dan Quinn came from and like how he had KJ Wright and you see like the chess piece that KJ Wright can be for Seattle, I think he still kind of has like that sort of player build in mind for weak side linebacker, where I want a guy who can essentially be kind of like another strong safety on the field, where he's got the length to match up against tight ends. Yeah, but I'm
Campbell's
talking about
6'3",
like
230, and like long and quick and
right. So that's what I'm saying. So I'm saying that's like the type of guy that Dan Quinn likes to have a weak side linebacker. And until he has another guy,
he's the same kind of guy. That's what I'm saying.
He's not as big as Campbell.
He's 6'3". He's 6'3", 230 pounds.
But I'm talking about like the wings. Like I don't even think Cunningham's like the same type of athlete that Campbell is. Like Campbell's out here. Campbell ran like a 4.58, and we've seen him make some crazy plays in coverage where he's just flipping his hips like a safety. And I think like that's the archetype that Dan Quinn has for weak side linebacker. So until he finds a guy that's athletically similar to that, I don't think Campbell's moving off the weak side.
Yeah, look, my opinion on Campbell is I do think he'd be better as a strong side linebacker, just because I do question the instincts, how much growth he's going to show there, just because at weak side he's doing a lot more reading and recognizing, and at Sam he wouldn't do that as much. And I do think if you can get another inside linebacker, whether that's a middle linebacker or weak side linebacker, to play next to Deion Jones that is of similar caliber or better, that won't have those same struggles but also be athletic, I do feel like you can instantly with one move upgrade all three linebacker spots in terms of enhancing, and all of a sudden now you have one of the best linebacker cores in the league. But at the same time, like I'm with you, Charles. I think I'm fine with Campbell staying there for another year at weak side linebacker. I do think you can certainly get by with him in most of the Pac-7, as you said, if you can upgrade the front four. If you can get guys that can consistently get pressure. Like I think my personal, while everybody else has been complaining about, Ricardo Allen or other issues, I think the biggest flaw in this defense is they have a base defense and a nickel defense that's fronts are too different. And I think if you can get those things to be sort of all in one, if you can go out there and have a base unit that can rush the quarterback and you have a nickel unit that can stop the run, you don't have to have all these stupid substitution penalties and these wasted timeouts that the team has had.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of plays that the Falcons have given up, this year. Like you go back to that Kansas City game and there's plays where they're getting beat in the secondary, largely because they have their base front in and they can't get any pressure on the quarterback. And then there's times this year where you go back and you see them getting gashed by the run because, they're trying to get after the quarterback and, they're giving up a 12-yard draw play or something like that. So I do feel like if they can make that to me is their biggest need on defense, more so than these other issues. If they can upgrade free safety, if they can upgrade linebacker, then by all means do it. But, the priority needs to be, defensive line.
I agree.
All right. And speaking of defensive line, we'll get to see what they can do this week against the Saints. We know, historically speaking, when the Falcons play well against the Saints, at least prior to this year, it's been when they've been able to get pressure on the quarterback. And I think that will play a big part in this upcoming matchup. The Saints offense is very potent. They will have a healthy Willie Snead this week. They will have a Michael Thomas that's, 16 games into his NFL career as opposed to 3 games in. So he's better. They will have Brandon Cooks, who's, at least from my perspective, maybe I haven't been following close enough, but has been playing a lot more consistently in this part of the season than he was early in the season. So this is a very potent Saints passing game that could potentially be troubling to our secondary, who did play well against Carolina, but as I said earlier, you're not exactly great wide receivers there. So I do think the pass rush is going to play a big part over whether or not our guys can match up with some of these guys, because without Trufant to lock down Brandon Cooks like he did early in the season, now you're probably putting Alfred on him maybe. Then you're asking Jalen Collins to match up against Michael Thomas. 2 years ago, Kelvin Benjamin would have been a better receiver, but I think it's by far Michael Thomas has been a much better player than Kelvin Benjamin at this point. And that's going to be a little bit more of a challenge to, I think, Collins. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think this is going to be I think it's going to be a shootout, kind of like last time, where we're just kind of hoping that the Falcons offense can just outscore another great offense, which is now the realm of possibility because they've been doing it, pretty much all season long. But like you said, you have Michael Thomas, who's just been a monster this year. Willie Snead's healthy. Brandon Cooks is, Brandon Cooks had a little quiet patch in the middle of the season, but he's really turned it on the past couple of weeks. And Drew Brees is still playing on top of his game. I think maybe the pass protection hasn't been quite as good as I think as Drew Brees is normally used to having it, but it's not like the Falcons have any real game breakers in regards to their pass rush besides Vic Beasley and Adrian Claiborne on a good day. So I think this is going to be a good old-fashioned shootout, like they always are, and it'll be a fun game.
Well, if Unger can't go, that helps out the Falcons quite a bit.
Definitely. Yeah. If Grady Jarrett's going up against a backup center, then that's a big benefit to the Falcons.
Because as solid as Jack Allen was for Michigan State, it would be his first start, I believe. And Grady Jarrett would dominate him. And then Andrews Pete hasn't really been doing well at left guard.
He's at left tackle now.
They actually have been playing him at tackle.
Yeah.
I don't watch a lot of the Saints because I can't bear to watch them play football. I don't like watching them play football because they're the Saints. Unless they're losing, it's not fun to watch.
Okay.
But yeah, Mike Thomas is good. Cooks is good. I do think the Falcons could get around Streif pretty easily. And I do think Beasley could get around Streif pretty easily. I just think that the Saints are going to scheme against the Falcons pass rushers on the outside like they did in the last game, where it was basically a lot of short throws, a lot of 3-step drop back hit kind of stuff, and then a lot of chips on the outside with running backs.
Charles, I'm curious on the opposite side of the ball, since you've been watching these guys all year long. What are your thoughts on sort of how the Saints defensive line matches up with the Falcons offensive line? Our offensive line has been good this year, but there's been times a little too many instances this year where they seem to get their butts kicked a little bit too much than we would like. I think Matt Ryan has been hit like 109 times this year, which is kind of ridiculous. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on sort of Fairley, Cam Jordan, and, my personal favorite, Sheldon Rankins? Oh, yeah.
Well, what was funny? When I think Sheldon Rankins came back in the lineup week 7, because yesterday was the 8th game. Their run defense cut down. I don't have the tweet pulled up, but they were giving up over 4 yards per carry before Rankins came in, and after he came in, now they're down to like just over 3. So, and their defensive line is really it's kind of streaky. So you'll have, I think Rankins is like the model of consistency on that defensive line. I mean, at least on the interior. So you have Rankins, who's just been a stud against the run, like really, really strong against double teams, really gets moved off the spot. And Fairley is kind of like the wild card. So it's just been Fairley how he's been his whole career. If he's on, he's a top 7 or 8 defensive tackle in the league. If he's off, then he's just another guy out there. But when Fairley and Rankins are both on, like if you go back and watch the game they had against the Rams, they were just clobbering dudes all game long. And you even go back and watch against the Bucks, where that wasn't Rankin's best game that he had, but Fairley hit the switch where he said it's go time, and he was just pummeling people in that first Bucks game. And on the outside you have Cam Jordan, who Falcons fans all know and love, and I thought he was probably the biggest Pro Bowl snub this year, because I think he's had an excellent season since they've played the Broncos. And like their defensive line it's streaky, but there's a lot of talent at 2 defensive tackle positions and an end. So when they're hot, they can really, really mess a game up. And, I think that Mac should be able to handle Rankins and the other guys they have inside. I think Chester may struggle a little bit against, Fairley and Rankins. But I do think that they should be able to match up, pretty well against the Saints defense. You just kind of have to wait and see if it's going to be a Nick Fairley game where he decides that, all right, well, I'm just going to show everybody why I can be like a top 8 defensive tackle in the league today.
I'm curious if Ben Garland has to start for Andy Levitre, who's dealing with a hip injury. I haven't heard any updates about what Levitre's status is, but would that give you a lot more concern if Garland's forced to start this game at left guard?
Yeah, it would, because like Rankins hasn't been the most like consistent pass rusher yet. It's like you'll see times when he gets kind of like he'll pull a Grady Jarrett and he'll get caught like at the top of the pocket, and he's not really making any movement either way. But he will hit this switch like once every couple of third down plays where he just fires off the ball, and he's so low to the ground and so powerful, and he has pass rush moves like a defensive end. So if you're going against someone like Ben Garland, who hasn't gotten much offensive reps outside of LA and San Francisco when they were blowing them out already at the end of the game, when you're coming across someone who's already that skilled, that could be a bit of an issue. And I don't think Ben Garland can block Nick Fairley at all. So that would definitely be a big problem for the Falcons.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's probably the one area of concern with this offense going against the Saints defense. We know their secondary is bad. So It's really just going to be a question of, can this offensive line hold up and give Matt Ryan the time to pick apart that secondary? Because, I don't think there needs to be any sort of deep analysis to basically say, even with Julio and Sanu not being quite 100% with the toe and the groin injury, but with Taylor Gabriel being a much different player now than he was early in the season, with Justin Hardy, basically whenever you basically get too focused on our other receivers, suddenly Justin Hardy, converts a 3rd and 12 or something like that, or gets a red zone reception or a touchdown or something like that. And, Alger Robinson's always that threat to take the top off of the defense. So certainly I do feel like the Falcons has what it takes to really sort of light up the scoreboard in this game. It's just going to be a question of whether the offensive line can give Matt Ryan the time. I do think last week we saw the offensive line struggle against Carolina's pass rush, but I think Matt Ryan handled it beautifully. He was basically, I wouldn't say running for his life, but he was just sliding out of the way and just finding open receivers. So if Matt Ryan's going to play like that again, then I don't think it's going to be that big an issue. But, I don't know. whatever reason, it might not go that way. But, I feel like the Falcons have an opportunity to sort of, I can't think of the word, but basically put up a lot of points and put up a lot of yards on the Saints defense.
Yeah, that's it. If you can just not let the defensive line kill you, then they should absolutely shred the Saints again. Yeah, I mean, the Saints defense is awful outside the defensive line.
Yeah. Why aren't they playing Stephon Anthony? Did he get injured?
No, I don't think. Well, they have him
on IR, but I don't really remember him actually getting injured.
I don't remember if he had an actual injury either, but he didn't play that much this year. And even when he was in, he was pretty rough. He didn't look nearly as good as he did in his rookie year. When I don't remember the guy's name, but they put somebody in over him, and the upgrade was just very clear. So I wouldn't be surprised.
Craig Robertson?
Yeah, Craig Robertson. Craig Robertson, he's not good either. So I think Anthony just kind of had a little bit of a sophomore slump year.
Well, if they don't want him anymore, I wouldn't mind seeing him here.
Yeah.
Fair enough. You guys got any other thoughts on this Saints game, or you want to just move on to the mailbag?
I'm good.
I'm good. I mean, I think their corners are awful, and Atlanta should probably just attack them early and often, especially with a lot of screens.
Yeah, I think it's going to look a lot like the first Saints game this year. Just both teams just lighting up the scoreboard, and Atlanta just holding out a little bit longer at the end. Yeah,
I certainly think if the Falcons get off to the faster start of the two, that plays into their advantage. We haven't really had to see this team play too many games where they've had this sort of and usually when they do, they usually take care of business in the third quarter, like we saw against Green Bay. I feel yeah.
So Julio Jones lost the game for them.
That's ridiculous too. Of all people,
I know. Yeah,
I think he interfered on that interception too.
What do you say?
But I think he was probably interfered with during the interception too. But that's neither here nor there.
No, I just
think the Seahawks interfered.
I just think he just dropped the ball.
Yeah, obviously Sherman interfered with him on that last play, but I just think that was just Julio. The 3 mistakes he makes a year, that just happened to be one of them.
And then one of them wound up in DJ Swearinger's hands and not being an issue, and then the other one was – what was the other one? The Chargers game? Like the week right after? Or
– It was the Eagles.
No, it was a really bad drop.
The Eagles game.
It was the Eagles game.
Bad drop.
Yeah.
But that didn't result in a pick. He had a drop that resulted in a pick versus but oh well, it is what it is. I don't want to trash Julio Jones.
He's had 3 picks bounce off his hands this year, which makes Ryan's stats even more insane when you look at it that way. You're like, God damn, he had a total of 4 picks that were really his fault.
All right, let's jump into these mailbag questions. The first 2 come from Cookie by Nature and Jimmy Yellow Jacket. They're basically the same question. How do you think the Falcons will fare in the playoffs?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It all depends on matchups. If they can win this week, I think they can and probably will make it to the NFC Championship game. After that, I can't give you any guarantees, but I think they can make it to the NFC Championship game. And I do think they could give Dallas a run for their money regardless.
Yeah, I think it really depends on matchups too. So, like Detroit, I'm not concerned about Detroit at all. I'm not really concerned about the Giants either, even though Odell could pop off. But Eli's just been so bad like the past month that I'm not really concerned about them either. Seattle, they don't really scare me. They haven't been able to run the ball. Earl Thomas being out is huge. Teams have really been able to throw on them besides the Rams. So I think Atlanta could really light them up too if it came to that. But Green Bay really does scare me though, because like Aaron Rodgers, he has just hit like Terminator mode, where he's just making that entire offense better than like the skill level would have you think. So I think if Aaron Rodgers were to come back to Atlanta in like the divisional round, I think that would be a really, really tough game just because it's hard to beat like a non-division opponent twice in the same season. But besides that, I think the Falcons can run with anybody in the NFC. Seattle, Dallas. I think we saw last night that Dallas's defense is not that great, and that like the Falcons could probably put up, what they usually do, 35 plus on Dallas's defense. So Green Bay is the only team that really scares me right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, people are going to hate me for saying this, but the Green Bay team is going to be a little scary because I do think that's going to be the matchup the Falcons draw in the second round when they get the bye. And it's sort of similar to the 2010 season where we played them in the regular season. We beat them in a pretty close game, I think on like a last-minute field goal or something like that. Then we beat them this year in the regular season in a pretty close game. And then Aaron Rodgers went into FU mode down the stretch and basically came into the Georgia Dome and lit up our horrible defense. And that's the fear I have, this year. I do think the Falcons can beat the Packers. I do think the Falcons can beat any of these NFC teams. But I do feel like Green Bay, Dallas, and probably the Giants, given Seattle's struggles and the probability that we'll be playing them in Atlanta and their terrible road team, are probably the three teams that will give the Falcons the most run for their money. I do think Dallas is beatable. My biggest concern with Dallas is basically, even though our offense can score on them, I just roll over our defense with their offensive line and our defensive line, and basically just play keep away. And Zeke Elliott will have 200+ yards, and they'll have 40 minutes of time of possession or something like that. That's the concern with Dallas, but I do think their defense is very suspect. So if the Falcons can get the ball against them, they can certainly line up the scoreboard, and I think that's a potential another shootout sort of game. And the Giants, the big concern with them is we've seen this team have some issues with good defenses. If their defensive line can create pressure and then sort of Janoris Jenkins can sort of keep Julio in check and the other corners can do their job, and Odell Beckham pulls a Odell Beckham, then that's a game that potentially could get the Falcons into trouble. But again, I don't feel like the Falcons, any of these teams are better than the Falcons, but those are the sort of matchups that can create some issues, I guess.
I think the best way for the Falcons to beat Dallas, though, is to run all over them the way that they did last year and give Freeman and Coleman the ball 35, 40 times combined and just let them run all day and play keep away, and don't let Dallas have the ball to play keep away. Have a couple 10-minute drives in there, and I think force Dallas to throw the ball and force them to make bad decisions. And I think again, not talking shit about Dak Prescott, because I know I'm going to get shit from Chuck if I do, but I think as a rookie, he's going to make some dumb mistakes, especially in the playoffs, especially if he gets pressed and he's down 14-0 and has to try and come back from behind from 14-0. I think he's going to do something stupid and throw a pick down 14-0 to put the other team in position to score easily.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I guess to me the issue with Dallas is I feel like my concern, and not necessarily my fear, but my concern is it'll be when we play them, if and when we play them, it'll be a game similar to last year's game where they just sort of steamroll us in the first half, and we won't have the opportunity to rely on Brandon Weeden being terrible to basically come back on them. And that game plan in terms of their second half, like they were just gashed in the second half of that game. And so I feel like that this Dallas team is much better than that Dallas team was. So if they were able to get up to two scores like they were that week, I do feel like they'd be in a better opportunity to hold on to that lead. But I do also feel like we can, which we did in the second half against that defense, even more so this year, given how good our offense has been this year compared to last year. So These are all unique matchups, and who's hot. Aaron Rodgers looks hot. The Falcons' offense looks hot. If we can just get our defense, particularly our pass rush, to sort of be a little bit more reliable, I do feel like the Falcons have as good a chance, if not a better chance, than anybody in this NFC.
Yeah, the NFC feels wide open. Honestly, the only team that would surprise me being in the Super Bowl would be the Lions if they were to make the playoffs. But like, I don't think Eli has it in this year. But like Dallas, New York, Green Bay, Atlanta, Seattle, I wouldn't be surprised if any of them ended up making the Super Bowl. And it's just one of those years where there aren't any really perfect teams. Everyone has like their own critical flaw, and you just kind of want to see how it plays out in the playoffs.
I think you could say that on both sides, though. I think in the AFC, there's a lot of teams with a lot of flaws.
That's a two-man race, Pittsburgh and New England.
Unless Kansas City gets to that
one. Kansas City gets lucky like they have been.
Where Alex Smith just comes out and craps the bed when he has to play against a team that can actually score the ball in the playoffs.
But I'm just thinking like that game he had against the Saints a couple of years ago. That like if we can get one of those, if you can get that game in the AFC Championship game from Alex Smith, then they got a shot.
Yeah, it's possible. I don't know.
It's probably not going to happen.
No, I think I think the NFC team is going to play the Patriots or the Steelers in the Super Bowl.
Well, I hope you're right that it's the Patriots or the Steelers. And I prefer the Steelers because I think the Falcons match up better with them, especially their defense.
It would be the Raiders if certain thing had to happen.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't control whether a guy breaks his fibula. We as Falcons fans should understand that. Michael Vick in 2003 broke his fibula on a freak accident, just like those two guys did.
Yeah, it's the crazy thing about it is like Carr has not been hit at all. Like he's only been hit like 30 times this year.
Yeah, Raiders offensive line, they've only given up 5 sacks this whole year. And one of them was that fluke Vic Beasley play where Carr was already running out of bounds. They just kind of credited Vic with the sack. So he hasn't been touched all year. So to see him get hurt the one time he really does get popped was pretty bad.
Yeah. All right. Markel Jefferson asks, is this team ahead of schedule than expected? Should we be mad if they don't win it all this year?
Yes, I think they're ahead of schedule, and no, I wouldn't be mad if they didn't win it all. Well, I think they're ahead of schedule because I liked Keanu Neal and Deion Jones coming out of college, but I didn't expect them to kind of be a positive impact this quickly. So in that regard, I think, you've gotten a good impact from your first 2 picks. You've seen improvement out of 4 of your 5 picks in 2015. Vic Beasley, Jalen Collins, Tevin Coleman, and Grady Jarrett. So I think we're headed in the right direction. I do think they're ahead of schedule because this team is much better than I thought it was going to be. This team is it's like the perfect best case scenario happened this year. Really, you had offense just be ruthlessly efficient, explosive second year under Kyle Shanahan, and then you had a defense that's not good but is capable of making big plays every once in a while. So I'm absolutely pumped about this season.
We should not be mad if they don't win it all this year. This is not a team that is built to win it all. It may be next year if the defense takes a lot of strides, but I mean, just making the playoffs and winning the division, like I was predicting 10-6 and being the wild card. They're 10-5 right now and they won the division. And they could finish 11-5 in the number 2 seed. So yeah, they're ahead of schedule, but I mean, don't get over your head. Like just don't get over your head on this one.
Well, I'll be a little different in this regard. I don't think anybody should be mad. Let me say that first. And is the team ahead of schedule? Yes, I think so. But here's the thing that I can say about the NFL. If you make it to the Super Bowl, you better win it because you can't take those for granted. Okay? And you look at a team like Carolina, where you look at a team like Green Bay 5 years ago.
Carolina,
where everybody just people assume that, oh, we made it to the Super Bowl. We'll, we're getting Kelvin Benjamin back next year or whatever. Oh, we're going to add all these pieces to our defensive line and we'll be better next year. Like, that's not usually how the NFL works. And it's the same way sort of with if you make it to the championship game. Now, it's not to suggest that you can't make it back, but when you go throughout this league history, it's usually like, okay, you make it to the championship game 1 year, and then you get another chance like 3 or 4 years later. The Falcons certainly are a testament to that. Even you look at a team like the Saints, they went to the NFC Championship game in 2006. They did go back to the Super Bowl in 2009 and won it. But, I don't think they've been back since then. So it's one of those things where, like, not to sit here and be like, you should be mad if the Falcons make it that far and don't win it. But it is one of those things, if they do make it that far, then you have every right to expect and want the team to take care of business then and there, because you can't take those opportunities for granted. Anybody who's been a Falcon fan long enough knows that it seems like it's like every 6 to 8 years, this team gets a real shot to make a really deep run, and then they go back to being mediocre for another 6 to 8 years, and then they rise up. So if we get there this year, then yes, you should definitely want them to win. But if they don't, then don't be mad about it. But, just be like, oh, man, that may have been a better opportunity than we thought it was going to be, and only time will tell, and we'll find out. So, Markel asks, should anyone else possibly leave other than Kyle Shanahan if we win the Super Bowl?
No. I think he's really the only hot coaching name we have on our staff, right? Maybe someone wants to take a look at like the secondary coach, but I don't know.
Maybe Keith Armstrong, if they believe that he's the next Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Wade Harmon might get an O-line gig somewhere. I don't know. I know Marquand Manuel was a hot commodity, and sort of we got some defensive coordinator interviews last year. I don't necessarily know if this year's defense has done anything to help his resume, but maybe somebody out there still wants to give him a shot. So, but should anybody else leave? No, not really. Markel asks, how can this offense get better next year?
I think Chester's probably gone, right? So you got.
I think Chester's like retiring at this point.
Well, that's fine. You got to find another right guard. I don't think Chester's been, a disgrace this year, but you can definitely do better than Chester at right guard. And I think maybe you find another an explosive tight end 2 to go with Austin Hooper. Those are the only really 2 things I can think of. Maybe you take a guy. Maybe you can take a flyer on a guy like Pierre Garçon if he wants to come to Atlanta in free agency. But you're set at quarterback, 2 backs. You're good at left tackle, center, right tackle, left guard too. So you got to find a right guard, and I would try to find an athletic tight end too.
I think if you could sign Ronald Leary for right guard and draft a guy in the 2nd round like Leggett or Bucky Hodges or Jake Butt who could add that dimension, that'd be the one. That'd be the group you could do. And so I'm with Chuck on this. A right guard and a tight end. Honestly, a tight end 1 to where you could have Hooper as more of that H-back type tight end. Because I think that's where Hooper really stands out more than as the true number 1. Because he did better earlier in the year when Tammy was the number 1.
Yeah, I think tight end, right guard are the 2 positions that you can say needs. And, while I'm not, thinking Wes Schweitzer is going to line it up, I do think there's a decent chance that, he gets the Mike Person treatment next year in terms of oh, yeah, we think this guy can start for us and he can be a sort of replacement level starter. And, clearly with the play of Chester and Levitri this year, I think the Falcons could probably get by with a replacement. Can upgrade that spot, then by all means. Yeah. I do feel like the tight end position, if you want to see tremendous growth in terms of this offense, I do think upgrading the tight end position and getting another sort of Greg Olsen, type of tight end. This is a really deep tight end class, a Martellus Bennett type of guy to sort of team with Hooper. That's where you're going to see most of the growth in this offense because they can just sort of run 2 tight end sets and run their entire offense out of that. And teams will think, oh, they're going to run the ball because they got their big set out, and we throw the ball on them, and the opposite goes true. I think in terms of sort of luxury spots that you could just might tweak a little bit. Yeah, I mean, if you lose Aldrick Robinson in free agency, then you probably want to add another fast receiver. If you can add another RB3 to sort of push Teron Ward, just because Devontae's entering his contract year and Coleman's entering, it's got 2 years left on his contract, and you just want to add an insurance policy as the third running back, just in case you wind up not re-signing one of those 2 guys over the next 2 years. And you have a guy that's already ready-made and developed to sort of, come up the depth chart if and when one of those guys leaves, then I think that's a move worthwhile. Probably getting a swing tackle to replace or push Tom Compton. If you can get another young athlete there, given, it hasn't been a big issue, but 2 out of the 3 years he's been in the league, Jake Matthews has dealt with injuries. So having a competent backup left tackle probably helps. But those aren't needs necessarily, but it's just like, oh, here's this good running back. Here's this good athletic tackle in the 6th round. Take a flyer on him and see what you got. But other than that, not a whole lot to really expect from the offense in terms of personnel wise. It's just maintaining what they're doing right now. Swaggy D's, I'm sorry. So are any of you going to the playoff game in Atlanta, and also Chick-fil-A or Zaxby's?
I'm not going to the playoff game in Atlanta as much as I want to. And as you can tell by what I've been eating all show, Zaxby's.
Interesting choice there.
I don't know. I mean, I probably won't end up going to the playoff game. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to go to the Saints game this week because it got flags. But yeah, Zaxby's all the way.
You're going to be in town this week?
Yeah. Well, maybe the plan was to go to the Saints game and then just catch a flight back home. But now they got flex. I might just say fuck it and go to Philly with my friends for New Year's.
See, I'm going to Biloxi for New Year's.
Mm.
But I was going to try and see if I could get tickets last minute and rush back, but no, not happening. That thing's sold out.
I am probably not going to a playoff game. I'm not planning on it. So, but I mean, if a ticket shows up on my doorstep, I'll definitely make time for it. But yeah, I'm not planning on it. And Chick-fil-A or Zaxby's, this is a tough one. I eat more Zaxby's, but if I had to pick one, I'm probably going to pick Chick-fil-A. If I'm being honest. I just tend to eat a lot more Zaxby's because I got to get my wing fix.
Yeah, we don't have Zaxby's up here in Baltimore, so I mean, anytime I'm down in Atlanta, I shove my face with Zaxby's.
Okay, there you go. All right, your boy J94 asks, who's the bigger threat to the Falcons, Cowboys or Packers, and can the Chiefs upset the Patriots?
We kind of talked about this already. I think the Packers are scarier just because, if Aaron Rodgers goes Robo Rodgers, and that's game pretty much. And I don't think the Chiefs can upset the Patriots. I just don't believe in Alex Smith at all.
I do believe in Tyreek Hill though. So
yeah, that's fair.
I believe in that defense magically scoring like 3 touchdowns and them beating the Patriots. And I would love to have that rematch in the Super Bowl. Because I think if the Falcons play the Chiefs again, they blow their ass out.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think if Rodgers is going to keep playing like this, then probably the Packers are the bigger threat to the Falcons. No, I don't really think the Chiefs can upset the Patriots, but there's a chance, I didn't think the Chiefs would beat some of the teams that they've beaten this year, so right opportunity comes along, maybe they got a shot.
They're not going to be anywhere close to as good next year either because their cap situation is fucking garbage. It's like they're being run by Mickey Loomis.
All right. I'll have to consult Sully for 2017 Chiefs breakdowns. Markel Jefferson asks, who is the best matchup for us in the second round, and who is the least favored matchup in the second round?
I feel like we already went over that.
Yeah, I mean, they won't be able to play Detroit because if Detroit gets in, they'll be the 6th seed. So I guess like Seattle or
if Detroit gets in, they'll be the 4 seed or the 3 seed.
Well,
it's still kind of up in the air.
Yeah, it's still kind of up in the air. Because the Packers have to play. The Packers play the Lions next week for the North Crown. I don't know anyone who thinks the Lions are going to win that game. I think they might get smothered like they did last night. And then it comes down to the winner of Giants Redskins. And so I think in that situation, if the Redskins win, they're in. But I think if the Giants beat the Redskins, I think the Lions are in.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how. I think Dallas is the only lock in terms of where the seed is.
Yeah.
The winner of the Green Bay Detroit game is going to be either the 3 or the 4 seed. The Giants are probably going to be the 5 seed, I think, if they win. But if they lose, then I think it sort of throws things in a flux a little bit. I don't know.
I think the Giants have the 5 seed locked up.
Oh, okay, do they? Okay. I didn't know if they lost, whether or not there's a chance. If Detroit won and the Giants lost, then Detroit could. Or I don't know. I guess you're right.
And play with the playoff machine like the rest of us.
Yeah.
You can figure that out on your own.
Yeah, I mean, I guess second, I guess if we're looking at the 2nd seed, that would be what, the 3, the 4, the 5. So presumably Green Bay, Seattle, or the Giants. So the best matchup out of those 3 is probably Seattle, just because of how terrible a road team they are
and how bad their defense is.
And they're pretty beat up with Earl Thomas and some of their other key players not playing up to par. So yeah. Okay. Markel's next question is, what would be the strategy for beating Aaron Rodgers a second time in the playoffs? And also, what about Tom Brady and the Pats?
Outscore both of them. I mean, it's not like the defense, stopped Aaron Rodgers in that first game. He shredded the Falcons, but you were able to come down one last clutch drive at the end, and I think that's what it would take again.
I don't know. I feel like the defense has taken the strides needed to at least shut down one part of that team, even if it's just the run game.
I don't know, because last time they played, they weren't using Ty Montgomery as a running back yet. He's been really good at running back.
He has been. He should have been a running back from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, look, we struggled against Green Bay last time, as Charles said, and they weren't playing nearly as good as they've been playing recently. I mean, I think the key would be our pass rush would have to really show out against them. And, Packers have one of the best pass protecting offensive lines in the league. They didn't really have a problem with our pass rush back then earlier in the season. I think our pass rush has improved, but whether or not they've improved enough to really get serious pressure on Aaron Rodgers remains to be seen. And so that would be the key. I think it's the same thing with Tom Brady. How you beat the Pats is you hit Tom Brady 12 times. If you can do that, then you can beat the Patriots, because basically anytime Brady gets shellacked, goes into a shell. But other than that, score a bunch of points. I guess without Gronk, I guess their offense isn't as scary as it could be. But just score 45 points, and I think that would be your winning strategy against pretty much any team. Jimmy Yellow Jacket asks, who are some veteran players you compare our young guys to?
Ooh, that's a fun one. If you're looking at the defense, I would say Grady Jarrett is a lot like Brennan Mebane. I'd say Vic Beasley's a lot like Cliff Averill. Deion Jones, he's tough to figure out.
Deion kind of
I don't
reminds
really
me
have
of what's that dude in Arizona? Deion Buchanan. I think Deion's a little bit better. I think Deion's had a better season,
yeah.
but like in terms of size, like that's pretty similar type of player.
And then, yeah, I'd agree. And then Campbell is KJ Wright, because I don't think he's as good as KJ Wright.
Discount KJ Wright.
Like destitute man's KJ Wright. And then Keanu Neal, I think he doesn't, like, people want to say, oh, he's Cam Chancellor, oh, he's Cam Chancellor. Not like what William Moore probably could have been early on in his career. Like, he reminds me a lot of a more instinctual William Moore.
For me, I mean, like, yeah, Averill and Beasley comparison works for me. Olivier Vernon's another guy that I think, Beasley has the potential to grow into.
Vernon sucks.
Vernon's not good.
I think Vernon's okay. We'll save that for another day. I think Deion Jones, like, his sort of spectrum is somewhere between like Wesley Woodyard and Danny Trevathan, I guess. I
He
think
could be Darryl Washington, though. I feel like if he gains some weight, that's his max potential, minus all the issues off the field with like PEDs and all the other shit. I feel like Washington's been suspended for like 3 years now.
Seems like it, yeah. Campbell, I don't know. Like, it's like part of me wants to say like Zach Brown, I guess. Like, that's what it sort of feels like.
I think Zach Brown's way better than Campbell. At least
it just feels like a really good athlete that just can't quite get to the level where he could be. Like, that's sort of how I feel about Campbell, but we'll see what he does the rest of this year and next year before I make any final judgments on it.
Campbell has been injured quite often this year, though.
Yeah, and if we're gonna stick with the theme of young guys like Ricardo Allen, like Ronnie Lott,
Come on, man. Let's be realistic here.
Don Taylor.
Let's be realistic here. Like, Keanu Neal comparing him to like John Lynch makes sense.
No, we're just we need to stop the Ricardo Allen disrespect because
he ain't Ronnie Lott. He is an average NFL safety.
Of course he's not Ronnie Lott, but you guys, like, I don't know, I'm not going to just lump you in there, but so many people made this dude out to be like he was just some practice squad player that happened to be out on the field at free safety. And then, like, we had this weird obsession with wanting to sign Eric Berry to play free safety, which just doesn't make any sense. And I think like the past month, I mean, just by looking at like the NFL,
he's improved a lot in the last month, though. But I think it was because competition was a lot easier too.
Well, I'm saying if I can look at the NFL 1000 grading scale right now, and for the season, Ricardo Allen is the 13th ranked free safety in the league right now. I think,
to be fair, there's not a lot of good free safeties in the league, though.
Like, when you compare what he's done this season to what a lot of teams have at free safety, I think he's easily above average. Like, I was blindsided by how replaced Ricardo Allen with Eric Berry sentiment started. I thought that was just like one of the dumbest things I had seen. That was worse than like people wanting to fire Kyle Shanahan last year. It just didn't make any sense because it's not even like you could point at Ricardo Allen and say he's the reason why the defense is bad. Like, I guess with Shanahan you could say, yeah, I didn't like some of his calls, but the Ricardo Allen hate just came out of left field for like no reason.
I think when they finally address the defensive line, and I think they've been waiting for this year because of how deep the draft is and how deep the free agency class is going to be, that they're going to spend a lot of money on the defensive line. they're going to spend a lot of money and a lot of draft picks on the defensive line that have been needed to be spent.
Yeah.
Guys like Nick Perry will be considered. Guys like Jabal Shiard will finally be considered. Hell, who knows? Maybe they give Deion Jordan a shot. And maybe they make Aaron's wet dream come true and they sign Calais Campbell.
If they throw money at Eric Berry, I'm done. I lose all positive feelings about this regime. I want everybody gone if they give Eric Berry a huge contract.
No, it's more likely they give Ricardo Allen a 3-year, $6 million deal and throw him back there for 3 years.
That's fine.
And then try and draft someone next year to challenge him.
That's fine.
Well, Charles, bravo. Everything he said.
Thank you.
I don't have to add anything to it. It's just, to me, it was the same thing. Like his play has been the exact same as it was last year. Okay, he doesn't have as many interceptions or whatnot, but like all of a sudden, like people did a complete 180 on him, and the whole like it won't take a step until we get better free safety, and it's like his biggest sin is he hasn't been good enough to cover up for other players' mistakes. Like that's his biggest sin. And
not
it's
even
instead of
he has covered up like a lot this year, I think. Like especially with Campbell and Keanu, like he's covered up for their mistakes, but he's not Earl Thomas, so he sucks. Like it's frustrating.
Yeah. I mean that's how I sort of feel about it. Like I just think like, yeah, do you want to get a better free safety than Ricardo Allen? Yeah. Of
course.
Sure. But it's not easy to do. Like there's like as Charles said, like there's only like 3 good like I just don't understand. Like people think playing cover 1, cover 3 is like an easy job, and like you can just go down the street and find a safety that can do all those sorts of things. It's like that's what makes Earl Thomas so unique. That's what makes some of these guys so unique. And it's just like Rodney McLeod is like probably the second best do that in the league, and sort of he's like this weird like undrafted free agent that sort of emerged out of nowhere in St. Louis, and then all of a sudden gets to free agency, and it's like you had to speak a secret password to know about Rodney McLeod, and then all of a sudden the Eagles give him $40 million, and it's like goes from mid-level to one of the best in the league. If you can find a Rodney McLeod type, then by all means do it. But all these teams out there are trying to find that player, and no one, the Saints thought they had one in Jarris Byrd, and guess what? That didn't work out. And Jarris Byrd, at least going into his last years in Buffalo, was as good as any safety in the league. But hey, Ricardo Allen, keep doing what you do. I think the Falcons regime will certainly applaud you for it, but the fan base may not. So we'll see what happens. Yeah,
this defense will look a lot better when you don't have 300-pound linebackers and offensive guards playing on the defensive line.
Fair enough.
That may be a fair
statement. So question for you. As a value signing, what are your thoughts on Abry Jones? Because you are the defensive line guy.
That's fine. Abry Jones is fine, but that's just your backup nose tackle, unless you want to slide Grady Jarrett back to 3-tech. I think Abry Jones has been pretty good since.
I would slide Jarrett back to 3-tech.
Okay. I mean, I think Abry Jones has been good since Roy Miller got hurt, and I he hasn't been at Roy Miller's level, but I thought Roy Miller was like probably top 3 nose guard in the league before he went down, and Jones has been pretty good filling in for him. I mean, I think I would rather have Roy Miller because I don't think that Jacksonville's going to bring him back, but you just got to upgrade that defensive line. I'm fine with the secondary the way it is going in 2017 because Jalen Collins can at least be a starter level corner. Alfred's above average. You're going to get True back. Keanu's been a stud this year. Ricardo Allen's fine. Just please, for the love of God,
Poole and Goodwin are good.
Just upgrade the defensive line. That's all I want, man. It's been too long. We've been rooting for a team with a horrible defensive line for too long. We deserve better. We have the secondary set. The linebackers are good enough. Let's go get some pass rushers. Let's go get some run stuffers. Enough is enough.
Speaking of the secondary, Abraham Lewis asked, how surprised are you so far with Jalen Collins' progress from rookie year to now in a starting role?
I mean, I think they've been using him where he wins. They say, hey, you're tall, you're long, you're not the quickest guy, so we're going to put you on the biggest receiver these other teams have, and you're going to press them all day and just go after it. And outside of maybe 3 plays this year, I thought he's done a good job.
Yeah, he's been fine. You know, I think I thought he had some moments. Like, if you just went back and watched all 22 from his rookie year, I thought he had some nice moments. But overall, it was easy to see why he kind of lost his playing time towards the end of the season. So I think the biggest thing with Jalen Collins is that he's a lot more physical this year than he was last year. Maybe it's just not being afraid of NFL athletes anymore. I don't know what it is, but you don't see him kind of backing away from contact like he did last year. And I think he's playing with better technique. And if you go and look at Jalen Collins' combine, that dude is just an absolute freak of an athlete. So I think you're kind of seeing him hone in on his technique, be a little bit more physical. And now you have a guy who's not a cancer on your defense anymore.
Yeah, look, I probably had a higher opinion of Jalen Collins going into this season than a lot of people, but certainly I would count myself as surprised at what he's shown so far this year. Hasn't been perfect by any means, but when you can basically say, oh yeah, he can go one-on-one against Kelvin Benjamin and do that and feel reasonably confident that he can hold his own against Michael Thomas or whoever the Saints throw him at this week, that's a big improvement, because a couple weeks ago, people were saying he was done on this team. A couple weeks ago, it felt like we had no clue what was going to happen with him, and he's shown a lot of progress going so far, and I think he can continue to take strides, and hopefully we see that continue in the 2017. I mean, to me, I think the biggest issue with Jalen Collins is going to be, will he put in as much work in the offseason and on the practice field as he's done in the games? Because that was sort of the knock on him coming out of LSU, which was one of the reasons why he didn't play that much there, because he didn't practice hard enough. But then he got in the games and he played well. And I think the big key for him is going to be to keep this momentum going, carrying this into the offseason and sort of becoming more of a detail-oriented sort of player. And if he can do that, then the sky's the limit on his potential.
Yeah, and what I think, like, the concerns back at LSU were valid, because I think it was – I don't know if it was that draft class, but that the LSU coaches are pretty vocal about guys who don't work hard. I think it was – who was the guy that the Texans drafted? Sam Montgomery, when they when they had the poster outside the weight room and said Sam Montgomery skipped so and so many lifts. So I think those concerns are probably real. But when you're coming off a suspension and you kind of see a guy like Brian Poole just come in and pick up right where you left off and play even better than you did, that's gotta kind of drive you to be better than you were before. So, I mean, before Trufant got hurt, there was really no reason to force Jalen Collins into the lineup with how Brian Poole's playing. So that, I think that probably lit a little bit of a fire under his ass too.
Abraham Lewis asks, if Collins continues to play this good throughout the playoffs, do we have a cornerback problem? I think that's what that says.
No. It's like cornerbacks like pass rusher. You can never have enough good guys there. So that'd just be awesome.
I think the only problem that you have there is you might want to try a couple at safety for depth so that you can keep as many of them on the roster as possible. So you might want to try Brian Poole's depth at free safety for future years. So you can be like, yeah, this guy can play dime corner, nickel safety, free safety, strong safety. He's just depth everywhere. Because that's a good problem to have. Having 7-8 cornerbacks that you like enough to where you got to start moving them to safety, especially when they can tackle well, is a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good strategy, moving Poole to safety, particularly if Collins sort of maintains this. If you can see growth from Goodwin and Olatoye, you have 5 good cornerbacks, and then we'll see if Keem King is ready to sort of push into that situation next summer as well. So I think if if guys continue to maintain their playing ability and improve some of these young guys, then you're going to be pretty deep at cornerback. And I think all the people, Brian Poole, just like Ricardo Allen, instead of spending $50 million on Eric Berry, you can just spend, veteran minimum on Brian Poole and have him push Ricardo Allen. And, whoever is the best in that competition should be an upgrade at free safety. And, as long as you have the horses up front to sort of mask whatever issues you think there are on the back end, then you're good to go. So.
And why not try King King at free safety? At least let him in competition.
I don't know. I remember watching a King at San Jose State at safety, and I was like, he's not an NFL caliber prospect at safety.
Yeah, I like him corner. I mean,
yeah, the athleticism and the length at corner, like he's got a shot in the NFL, but he was such a bad safety at San Jose State.
I don't even think he's going to be on the team next year. So
probably not, but people wrote off Jalen Collins once upon a time too. So
it's very fair.
Abraham asks, Ricardo Allen is very confident when the rookies are doing what they're supposed to be doing, right or wrong?
He's a competent player, just like by himself. He's cleaned up for Keanu. Like I already said, I think he's fine. He's cleaned up for Keanu and Devondre and Dion, not at the level of like a Earl Thomas does, but he's the only one who can do that at that level. So I think he's fine.
Abraham asks, thoughts on who should be Defensive Rookie Player of the Year? Thoughts on our draft class imported to their teams?
Yeah, Defensive Rookie of the Year, it's got to be Bosa.
I think you can make an argument for Deion Jones over Bosa.
I don't think that at all. Bosa's got 9 sacks.
Yeah, I mean,
Deion Jones has 2 pick sixes.
Look, Deion Jones had a great rookie season, but he's not playing at the same level as Bosa.
No, Bosa's already playing like he's been a like top 7 edge defender this year. You can make a case that Bosa's had a better season than Vic Beasley.
You can make that case.
I probably agree with you too.
Well, you know probably how I think about that, but I don't want to be that guy. But
I wouldn't agree with that.
I don't think it's close. I think Deion Jones deserves recognition for an outstanding rookie season, but I don't think he's been better than Bosa.
No,
it's Bosa's all the way.
Yeah, and, Bosa's in a class of his own. It's like Bosa, like way up here, like in the clouds, and then in like that second tier, you have like Deion Jones, Scott O'Neal, Jalen Ramsey. But Bosa he's been unbelievable this year. Just completely separate himself from the pack. I would be stunned if he didn't win in like a landslide.
Yeah. I mean, look, I get people that want to recognize Deion Jones and sort of the season he's having, but some of the takes are like it's Deion Jones or it's a farce or something like that. Like, come on, like really, like no, like Deion Jones might be like the second or third runner up in the voting or something like that, but like it should be Bosa. He deserves to win it. He's been the best defensive rookie this year.
Yeah.
Now Matt Ryan for MVP, that's a more legitimate case.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how to answer the second part of your question, Abraham, so I'll just go to the next one. He asks, for Aaron, would you still take Cam over Matt? Because I would take Colin over Cam. Look, let me for people that don't know, someone asked me about would you take Matt over Cam, and I said no. I said if I was going to take one guy for a game or a season, I'd definitely take Matt. But if I'm taking a guy that I want to build the team around for the next 5 years, I'd still choose Cam Newton. I think I can, the issues that Cam Newton has to me are pretty manageable. I don't think Carolina has always done a great job managing those issues, but I feel like the upside of my teams. I think the upside of my team, Cam's mechanics are bad, but you can just work on those. Like, that's not a huge deal. Like, not to say you can fix them, but you can just keep working on those things. You give me 5 years with Cam, I guarantee you his mechanics will be much better at the end of those 5 years than they are in Carolina. And the whole, like, pouting, sore loser stuff, like,
that's
like, okay, like whatever. Like, just get him a publicist that is going to coach him up on those things and tell him to use better body language at the press conference. That's really all it is. It's just a minor issue. But it's when Cam is on, like, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Like, I know Matt Ryan has been definitely on this year, and that's certainly true of his performance this season. But, over the course of 9 years in the NFL, I think Cam's A game has been shown consistently to be a little bit more higher than Matt's. And again, over 5 years, I take Cam.
So,
I think if Cam had a better offensive line, his footwork would be better. Because last year, when his offensive line wasn't shit, Noher was healthy, and all those guys were healthy, his footwork wasn't shit. His footwork was actually pretty decent, and his throws were good. His mechanics are all in his footwork.
Now, like, Cam is kind of in that, like that Andrew Luck, like, they're on the same plane for me, where if those guys aren't on their A game, their team is going to lose. And for me, that says more about the team that's constructed about them than it does their ability as quarterbacks. So we saw earlier this year, or we even saw 2 years ago, we saw Andrew Luck carry a horrible Colts team to the AFC Championship game where they just got blasted by the Patriots, right? And last year we saw Cam Newton carry, not a great Panthers offense. Ted Ginn's still your best receiver. You can do way, way, way better than that. We saw him carry them to Super Bowl berth where they just got dominated by, a better defense. And I think even this year you've seen flashes where Cam's on his A game and the Panthers have a chance. But if he's not at that B+, A- level, they're going to lose every single time. And I think that's more about the teams constructed around them than Cam's indictment as a player himself.
Yeah. And look, before anybody gets too mad at me, like, I've always been a big fan of Matt Ryan. I think there are a lot of good quarterbacks in this league. I think too often we sort of want everybody to be Tom Brady or Peyton Manning or whatever, this perfect sort of flawless quarterback. And when they're not, they get run out of town and they get over-criticized. And I think that's really been the issue with Matt Ryan. I think Matt Ryan has his strengths. I think he has his weaknesses. Same thing applies to Cam. Same thing applies to any quarterback in this league. From my personal opinion, I feel like the type of team that if I wanted to have a team, I would want to build around a quarterback more like Cam than I would around a quarterback like Matt Ryan. That's not sitting here saying that I couldn't or wouldn't want to build around a team with Matt Ryan as my quarterback, because I obviously support a team that has tried to build around Matt Ryan. I've been complaining for like 4 years that this team needs to do a better job building around Matt Ryan. So, like, it's the same issue wherever you go in this league, where, I think it's been an issue with Tyrod in Buffalo, but, that's another long debate for another day. So, no offense to Matt Ryan. I just think, from my personal taste, I would rather have Cam over a 5-year period than I would rather have Matt Ryan over a 5-year period. And on that note, Abraham asks, is Matt Ryan a poor man's Peyton Manning?
I said during his early seasons that was his ceiling. I think if he has a badass game this week and then turns into and wins the MVP award, you could make an argument that, yeah, he is. Again, I'm not saying that he's anywhere close to being Peyton Manning, but I think he's having a season this year that you could argue is as good as any that Peyton Manning had.
Wait, what? Did you say this season was as good as any season Peyton Manning's had?
I think you could argue that this season is as good as almost any that Peyton Manning had.
I think that's ridiculous. how Peyton Manning threw 55 touchdowns like 3 years ago, or 49 in Indy
on 650 attempts. Matt Ryan's only thrown 499 passes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what does that mean? Like a poor man's Peyton Manning. I don't know what that is. I think Matt Ryan is Matt Ryan, and that's good enough to win a Super Bowl with.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think that's probably the best answer. Yeah, I would say he's a poor man's Peyton Manning. I think, Matt Ryan wins from the neck up, similar to Peyton Manning does. So, I think in that sort of type of quarterback, then, yeah, I think Matt Ryan would qualify as a poor man's Peyton Manning. I don't think he's as good as Peyton Manning. But, Peyton Manning's in the conversation for the greatest quarterback of all times. I don't think Matt Ryan's in that conversation. But he's certainly having one of the best seasons that a quarterback has had of all time. So, that should count for something. Falcons Andy asked, do you expect any of the free agents on IR, Spoon, Ish, and Tammy to be back next year?
If any of them, I'd expect Ish. Maybe Spoon, but I think Spoon might want to hang it up. He's been getting these year-ending injuries every single year, it feels like. But I think Ish would be the one that would want to come back. He's got a shoulder thing. He might even be able to come back off in the playoffs, for all we know. So I think Ish would be the one that would come back. The other two, I think they're gone, because especially since they're over 30, I think they'd be gone.
Yeah, I think Ishmael and Tammy probably the two. I would be surprised if the Falcons re-signed Spoon. I think Ishmael's got a decent shot. I think there was a chance that he might have gotten decent offers from another team to basically be a poor man's Mark Barron for somebody else, but with the injury, that's probably going to hurt his sort of market value. I think Tammy, he'll probably get a similar treatment as like Chris Chester, where if the Falcons don't add another tight end, don't re-sign Levine Toilolo, which they probably will, then you could see them after the draft re-signing Tammy and giving him another run. But I don't think any of those guys are going to be priorities at the start of free agency to bring back next year. Ishmael maybe, if his shoulder injury's looking like it's going to be healed up. But, I think he'd probably be like a second week of free agency sort of signing. Charles, you got any thoughts on that?
No.
Okay. Good to go. All right. David asked, yes or no to each of the following being with the Falcons next year? Brooks Reed, Andy Levitre, Kyle Shanahan, Tyson Jackson, Taylor Gabriel, Cole Magner.
Oh, God. All right.
Who the hell is Cole Magner?
Yeah, what the hell is that?
He's the wide receiver that played for the Falcons in like training camp in like 2005. He was one of those training camp superstars.
I totally forgot about him.
If I had to guess who's not back on that list, I would say Shanahan and Tyson Jackson. I think everyone else might be.
I think Shanahan will be back next year.
I just don't see how that's. I don't really think that's going to happen. Who like we have three.
He's got a Mike Zimmer aura about him, where a lot of teams are going to be turned off by his arrogance. A lot of teams' owners aren't going to like him on a personal level, because a lot of people don't like him on a personal level. He's kind of a douche.
A lot of Falcon fans, once upon a time, felt that way.
And I don't think that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I agree that he's a great offensive coordinator. But for all we know, he's the next Josh McDaniels, who the first place he goes, he burns the house down, and someone has to come in and fix it.
And then he comes back to Atlanta to win Super Bowls.
Yeah, exactly. So, but in those 3 years that he's gone, maybe Matt Ryan declines to the point where he can't win Super Bowls. I think he's going to be very selective with his spot too, and he may not. He may look at LA and be like, no thanks. He may look at Jacksonville and be like, I'm good. You may look at Buffalo and be like, this is a fucking dumpster fire, and not want to go to any of those spots.
Yeah, but the thing
and
is,
then come back.
We only have 3 spots open right now. So next Monday, when we have, when all the coaches end up getting fired, who knows how many, head coach openings there could be. And I think if you're an owner and you just see how like prolific and efficient Atlanta's offense has been, I think you're going to take a chance on that if you have the opportunity to. If you're the Colts and you fire Chuck McDonald, I'm trying to bring in somebody who can get Andrew Luck in that offense firing on all cylinders again. So I'd be pretty shocked at this point, just with how consistent the Falcons offense has been week in and week out, if he's still offensive coordinator in 2017.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Charles, you make a valid point. Like, at this point, I've sort of had a sort of 50-50 sort of outlook on Shanahan's chances of sticking around. It's not something I want to focus too much on in terms of, but like, I think the odds, with 3 jobs open now, you have the Jets, you have the Bengals, maybe the Browns, maybe the Colts, Chargers.
Yeah, there's going to be Chicago. If you wind up having 7 or 8 jobs open, I think the odds are probably stacked against keeping Shanahan. But if it winds up being like 4 or 5, then I think that the odds are potentially in the Falcons' favor. We'll see. Again, it'll be a bridge, at least from my perspective, that we'll cross when we get to it. I'm more focused on sort of how the rest of the season goes, and we'll see how many interviews he gets that first week in the playoffs when the Falcons are in the bye week. As for the rest of these guys, I do think there's a decent chance that Brooks Reed comes back at a reduced price. I think Levitri's probably a definite return. I would be shocked if Tyson Jackson comes back. Taylor Gabriel's just a restricted free agent, so there's really no reason for him not to be back unless, Bill Belichick wants to trade a first-round pick for him or something like that. And Cole Magner, I think he's a guy that they're going to be stashing into next year, and he'll be replacing Nick Williams as the go-to white guy on the wide receiver spot. Okay, Jake, last question of the night is, what's our biggest position needs and who should I be watching during the bowl season? Defensive line. Focus on defensive linemen, because I think that's where we're headed this offseason. I don't really see too many glaring needs outside of defensive line where I'm panicking about what that's going to look like in 2017.
So if it was up to you, who would you put money on? Especially considering Nick Fairley is going to be a free agent.
Yeah, I mean, I throw money at guys like Jonathan Hankins, Benny Logan, Nick Fairley. Call the Jets about Sheldon Richardson. Just find some dudes. Like, Jonathan Hankins isn't the greatest defensive tackle in the world, but he's a bully up front. He's just got that mentality where he's just going to wear you down for 4 quarters and make enough splash plays where that just might be all you need. We talked about Fairley earlier. Sheldon Richardson, I think, is a stud. I think the Jets might be kind of finished with him because you have heard some questionable things that he's done this season with the Jets organization, but he's undeniably talented, and he spent a lot of this season playing as an edge. And even though he has the athleticism to be competent there, he's just very obviously a 3 technique. So just get somebody, anybody. Please.
Yeah, with Richardson, I was a little skeptical of him just because of the off-field stuff and having to throw money at him. But at this point, I'm sort of in the same boat with you, Charles, where I think any sort of talented defensive lineman, I'd be willing for the Falcons to take a risk on, just because I feel like it's such a big need that the Falcons really can't afford to sort of, turn their nose up at anybody as talented as Richardson. And certainly, the player I thought Richardson had the potential to become, and I compared to when he came out of Missouri, was my boy Jonathan Babineau. I think he has that sort of, prime Babineau type of skill. You can make the case Prime Babineau was Sheldon Richardson type of player. So I certainly wouldn't be upset if that type of player is back on the Falcons roster, since we know Babs is not that guy anymore. All right, guys, that's our show. We appreciate Charles for giving us his time and going on rants with us about quarterbacks. Charles, where can people find you out there on the interwebs?
Find me on Twitter at 4verts. Let's see. So we got the Bleacher Report, NFL 1000 stuff, which is, thank God, starting to slow down just a little bit with the season ending, which means I'll get back to draft stuff from the Falcoholic. And you should listen to our podcast. So I have a podcast called Setting the Edge with my one of my pals, Justice Mosqueda. He also writes with the NFL 1000 Project, and he does other stuff with Bleacher Report. And we do like game picks and make fun of stuff, and we do a little question and answer at the end. So it's been pretty popular so far. So I'm just gonna keep going and see where it takes us.
Justice was on the verge of being banned from Vegas for a gambling system he invented, by the way. Funny story about that.
Yeah, I know all about that.
Oh, man. Justice is the man. You got to listen to this podcast with Chuck. It's honestly good listening. I don't listen to many podcasts because my car kind of sucks. But when I do have breaks at work, I do listen to their podcast because it's really good, and because Justice is a badass.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chuck.
You guys know where to hit us up. As Chuck said, he's at 4verts on Twitter. I'm at Falcon. Scott is at Karasik S. You can hit up the show's Twitter handles at Falcons PFC. That's the best and easiest way to get those mailbag questions into us, also using the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. Be sure to check out our archives on ProFootballCentral.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes and Stitcher. You can watch the videos on YouTube. Subscribe to us there. Just type in Falcons Central Radio or Scott Karasik. You'll find that. And we'll be back next week to talk about the Falcons' win over the New Orleans Saints and talking a little bit about playoff seeding and all that type of stuff. So look forward to that, guys. And I guess this is our last show of 2016. So Happy New Year to you guys. I hope you guys, unlike the rest of the world, had a decent 2016. And we're looking forward to a much better 2017, hopefully with the Falcons going very far in the postseason.